Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the Brushes of Doom podcast with myself here, the 2013 Little Miss Shake and Bake Louisiana X. Today, I'm really happy to have this guy with me on air because his work I saw in 2012, 2013, and I was working currently at the time in Los Angeles, and a friend of mine named Tony, who was an oil painter, was always like, "Yeah, man, I think you would really dig this guy's work." Funny thing is that his studio, or where I've seen him paint, is a few blocks down the way. You think you'd just like him. So I ended up looking him up on Instagram and then eventually on YouTube, and I was just delving deeper and deeper into this dude's work because it fucking genuinely impressed me. It genuinely made me feel like, God damn, like this is what I really want to do with art to get me interested, aside from the nerdy comic book stuff that I've always been into. But then I found the very frustrating world of oils that to this day make me want to rip my hair out. Without any further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and bring the guy in. Sean Cheetham, is that how you say your last name?
Probably in England, yes, but we just say Cheetham.
Cheetham, there you go, man.
Yeah.
Cheetham,
yeah, but you have to say it with an accent.
Cheetham. How you doing, brother?
Doing good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making the time.
Of course.
So, for anyone out there that doesn't know who you are, let's talk a little bit about yourself. Who are you, and what do you do?
Well, that's a broad question. I am Sean. No, I mainly right now I teach, I paint, I do commissions, I make knives. I'm like all over the place. But originally I came from San Francisco, moved to LA in 1998 to go to art school, and kind of just ended up being stuck in LA. Now it's been almost 20 years, and figured at some point when I was old I'd be a teacher and showing galleries, and all that stuff kind of happened right after school, so been doing that ever since.
Nice. So where does the art in Sean's life start?
Well, it comes definitely from the family. My mom's side of the family, my mom's Chinese, and her side of the family, all those like her father, my grandfather, and his brothers, and even her mom were all really supportive of the arts when I was a kid, and we're all really good at it too. So my grandfather was a painter, sculptor, and it was just around all the time. And then my dad, even he was a jeweler, and so. But he minored in art in college, so he was really interested in it when we were kids too. So we just always did art, and it was just normal part of life. Never thought I'd be doing it for a living. I think when you're a kid, you don't think about that as a living, except maybe, I guess, if your parents were actually doing it for a job. But I just thought maybe I'd be a hero or something someday, a firefighter, or
That's really interesting. I've never really heard that before. The idea that having parents, because most people's stories when they talk about how they became an artist always involve them being like, my parents worked for the government or they worked for PG&E, and I just fell into art. And the fact that you've had such an artistic driven family, it didn't really occur to you to make it a living. Was it something that you just enjoy doing, or was it something that was just kind of, I don't want to say expected, but it was something that was just normal in the house to do? Because some people find art as a getaway. It almost seems like the way you grew up, from what you've said, kind of makes it seem like it was just something to naturally do around the house. So therefore there was inevitably you would get better because you were always surrounded by it.
No, it was definitely still a getaway for me. I think I probably did it more than everybody. In the family, I just had interest in it. Maybe also being a middle child, I just had to go tuck away in the corner and draw. It was destined to happen. But no, I mean, it wasn't like forced, like some traditional family that forces their kid to do piano or something and then they hate it. It was just like, it was there. I wanted to do it. And they're like, that's cool. Keep doing it. Here's some more pencils or whatever. And then with being able to draw with family members was really cool. The older ones, because I would definitely learn just by seeing that stuff. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't like my grandfather made a little bit of a living doing it, but I don't think he became too successful with art itself. So I just didn't think I had really the idea that it was a career choice necessarily. Except in then commercial art. Once I was closer to college, and I realized maybe I could work on Star Wars or something, because that's definitely something as a child I thought would be fun.
Seeing as that you do a lot of fine and eclectic art, do you still, I mean, with the idea of like, let's say working for Star Wars, do you still have like that need or want to work with like animators or storyboard artists? Because you have artists like Ryan Madeering, which is, I know I'm butchering his last name, but he's the lead concept artist for Marvel Studios. And he, when he talks in interviews, is always like, I was a guy who liked comics who eventually found like highbrow art and eventually merged the two together like an Alex Ross and found it to work for him. But I've also seen a lot of artists that they kind of they once they hit like photorealism, once they hit hyperrealism, or like what you and Karl Dobsky do, you both have a very, very beautiful style. And I mean, it's visually pleasing. Even when like the photo we have right now, I think it's a self-portrait of you in a brown hat and the greenish coat. And you don't see a lot of people that want to verge out of that style. They eventually just get there and they stay there. Do you still have that wanderlust of other ventures as far as animation or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. I went to school, like, so I went to art center after a few years of community college, and I decided to go into illustration because that's what I wanted to do. Like literally, the Star Wars thing was why I wanted to do illustration. And then through that, I met people who were doing, like the Clayton brothers were doing like editorial work at the time, and I was like, and they were painting really cool, fun stuff, and like kind of heavily tattoo influence, and I just thought that's really cool. I would like to, maybe try some of that. And then I just got into the painting through having to take classes in illustration. I got into oil painting and more figurative work, and a lot of those instructors were showing in galleries and stuff. So I thought, well, that's cool. You get to do whatever you want and make money. So then I started going that path. But I keep going back. I still think illustration, could be fun sometimes. I like the idea of just separating the work and the really kind of personal art, the money making, which has been a little bit of a problem over the years. When you do gallery work, you do get to paint what you want, but you kind of don't also, because no matter what, you're still trying to sell something to somebody. So like, I think even if you just do what comes from your heart, you're still, for me, there was always that like thought in the background, whether it's going to sell or whether people are going to like it, all those things that shouldn't matter when you're making something.
Do you feel that, do you feel that really affects you as an, like personally as an artist? Because there are like, even myself, when I have to do a commission or when somebody, we have a Comic-Con coming up here and I've been asked to be an artist at it and they want me to do this live painting. But the idea is because I have to do it, I kind of don't care to do it. Like I will, but I don't want to do it. I feel like when I have some more freeness to what I want to do on my time, I thrive more.
100%.
With you doing that gallery work, does that hinder you emotionally or personally? Because it almost seems like, obviously it pushes you to become a better artist and do timetable and crunches, but do you really feel you're getting the best out of what you can possibly do if someone's forcing you to do it? Quote unquote forcing?
Well, that's been the issue the last few years. When I was just out of school, I was really gung ho, and I liked that kind of that hustle, trying to get everything done, and whatever. I never loved the fact about like with painting in galleries where you have to do all the work first and then turn it into money. Or like a lot of other jobs, you do the work and you get paid because that's what you agreed to do. So I think that at some point that just got a little tiring, like that kind of hoping and putting in this work that, some of the best things I feel like I've ever done are still in my possession for some reason. And so, it's not like not easy, but bills keep coming in, so you got to keep paying them somehow. Um, so for me, it just felt like I burned out on painting a little bit. Not that I don't love it, but just like doing it for galleries at some point became,
Tedious.
yeah, became all kinds of things. Just not fun, not exciting. I still love painting. I just want to do it because I can, or I get to, or whatever, not because I have to.
Yeah, I do genuinely believe the wanderlust of art when you're trying to achieve, like I will use myself as an example. I used to work off of Gardner and Melrose a few years back in LA, and when my buddy Tony had showed me your work, I was just like, man, I want to do that. I mean, just the colors, the everything, like it had nothing to be like I want to be a Sean Cheetham, but I definitely would love to work well enough to where I can learn from this guy, or I could have something where I can kind of communicate artistically. And when you have that fire in you, when you don't know anything, you try 20 times as hard. Painting's frustrating, but it's fun because
Hmm.
you're trying to achieve something. But then years later, I mean, not talking about myself anymore, it's just like, I mean, in general, you start doing more shows, you start doing more commissions and all this stuff, and that wanderlust starts fading. And I feel that a lot of artists that I talk to genuinely feel like, do I want to keep doing this? Even though they don't have a problem with art, even though they don't have a problem with painting, it's kind of like you don't get a chance to actually miss it and take a break from it because you always have to try to pay some bill. You always have
Yeah.
to try to do something. How do you try, at least yourself, to get out of a rut when you're in that situation?
Well, luckily, I have lots of, I guess, hobbies, or I guess we can call them hobbies. I have lots of things I like to do, so like it's kind of hard for me to really get get too stuck doing one thing. Like the knives. I've been doing that. That's for me lately. That's been my artistic sort of journey. That is, or creative outlet, just purely for myself. I'm getting people constantly asking me if they're for sale and this and that, but that's where now it's going to become like painting, where I'm going to hate doing it and not want to do it. So I'm not. I'm just nothing's for sale. It's like I'm just doing this purely as like meditation, and it feels good. And then when I can
Yeah.
go to painting, then I can enjoy painting, and it just balances out.
Do you know David Chaffetz?
I know who he is, yes, but I don't know him. No.
Okay. Well, he was asking about him, and I talk pretty frequently about just a bunch of stuff, but he's a big palette knife guy.
Hmm.
And he's been looking at some of your palette knives that you have and is in love with them because he genuinely paints with them. His
Hmm.
his question for me to ask you was, can you actually paint with the palette knives versus mixing them? Because he's a connoisseur of sorts for the palette knife.
Will mine actually work? Is that what the question is?
Can you paint with them? Some palette knives, I guess you can't paint with.
Well, personally, I don't paint with palette knives ever, so I guess I don't have enough experience to know. But this is definitely a fully functioning palette knife, without a doubt. It's based on a palette knife that I like to use, but I mostly use palette knives for cleaning. So all the sort of angles and proportions were based on just one I like.
Nice.
And really, it's honestly like a piece of art that looks like a palette knife and can function like a palette knife. But for everyday use, I'd just be beating up something that I spent 10, 20, 30 hours on. So it's really going to be like a wall hanger.
Yeah, of course.
And maybe someday, it'll be sold.
You never know, man. So,
Yep.
David, if you're listening, you better get in line.
Start saving your pennies.
Let's go back to the art school, man. It's funny. We've had two or three people that go to art school in Los Angeles currently, and even my best friend who just did the Art Institute, and it's a very mixed feeling about going to an art school versus going to like an art college
Hmm.
or self-taught versus professionally taught. Now, as this person who was self-taught and then eventually, I do seminars and so forth to try to learn more, I envy the idea of going to an art college or some kind of institute to have a grasp and work with other people. But you also hear a lot of people say that when you're in those areas, sometimes it can be limiting because of faculty, because of environment. Do you feel that art school for you was a positive thing, or do you feel like it was something that was kind of so so or bad? Or
I feel like it was a positive thing for sure. I mean, I kind of went in, like with some experience and ability to draw. So, of course, I got help with advancing that. But I feel like a lot of what you get out, what I got was just kind of work ethic, exposure, connections, things like that. I mean, at some point, I had teachers who helped me get work. They got me in galleries, got me jobs, whatever. And I've done the same for my students. And I think that kind of is maybe the biggest thing I got, more than technical skills, because, like I said, I trained enough before I went in where I had a little bit of a head start.
Mhm.
But as far as like being pushed to like expand my thinking, definitely. And you know, I don't know about nowadays if I would say I'd go back. It's hard to say because I've done it. And it's just like it's an expensive thing to do, and it's also kind of a little. I shouldn't say this because I do teach in an art college, but it's not the best career to come out of the gates with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt with. I don't think.
Yeah, that's that's definitely true, and I think it's a smart thing to admit that, and I also understand the cautionary side behind it. But the reality of it is I, especially for Los Angeles, there's a lot of people that listen that are not privy to how LA works or how California in certain areas works. But like in Los Angeles, there are let's say 1,000 people every year that have the same ambition that you do aesthetically. Like they visually want to be the Sean Cheetham, or they want to be the Ryan Medeiring, or they want to be somebody who is noticed and can go to galleries and sell and make a living being an artist. But every year, if we're talking about school, is a graduating class, and every year there's more people put out into this world, and it's not always a guaranteed sale. It's not always a guaranteed employment when it comes to things, and that ambition starts to drop. And I feel that some people think that, well, it's really popular right now to do the whole tattoo thing. It's really popular to do artists and galleries because it is a little bit more prominent in other communities like the tattoo industry, where everybody like yourself, you, Dobsky, God damn it, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. He works with Dobsky and Roman Hurtado. He tattoos. I'm
Is
sure.
it Sean Barber?
Sean Barber, thank you. Sorry about that.
That's
Uh,
right.
like you including those guys as well as Hussar and a few other dudes, like you guys are genuinely pioneering, whether it's intended or not, to drive a whole type of tattoo artists and a whole type of industry into becoming better artists. I mean, there's always going to be illustrative art. There's always going to be a different bunch of stuff. But you guys definitely, when you became a little bit more noticed around like the Nico Hurtados and the Carlos Torreses and all this stuff, people wanted to achieve to be better physical artists rather than just doing traditional sense stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that when people say like, well, I'll just go to art school or I'll just do this and I'll just do that, and then I've made it. Then I've made it. And then they get there, and of course it's a great thing to learn from, instructors like yourself. But then they end up in the real world once they're done with those classes and realize that it's a rat race. Like
Yeah.
you and 100 other artists, or that other 1,000, are trying to get into those galleries or trying to find your niche or something.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely oversaturating the market with artists, but there's not work for everybody either. So I guess that you should try harder.
As fucked up as that sounds to some people, that's the God honest truth. That's the best answer a lot of people need to hear but don't want to hear.
Yeah, especially nowadays. So I've been teaching now like 15 years, I think, or whatever, maybe a little longer.
Hmm.
But whatever it is, it's long enough for me to now feel like I'm the old grumpy guy, like complaining about these kids these days. Because now I'm like double their age or even more than that, and it's like it's just a different generation from when I went in there. You know, we barely had internet when I was in art school. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have digital cameras. All that stuff that somehow makes life easier, but is so distracting that like people aren't getting better as people.
There's a book. Sorry to cut you off, but there's a book that I just got privy to about fuck, what's it called? I know it's somewhere around here, but it's the if you were to Google and type up the mind's eye on technology and telecommunications, the whole book talks about it and theorizes with science of how our brains at 21 to 25 peak, and then we have a 20-year like plateau of how we think and how we do and how we try to achieve things or receive information. And then that's usually when we're in our 40s and 50s, why you see older people, usually grandparents, their memory kind of goes. But they
Hmm.
talk about how cell phones, because we have instant gratification, the fact
Hmm.
that when we people freak out when they don't have their phone in their hand or something, but things like Twitter, things like Instagram, as helpful as they are, let's say for ourselves as artists, the second that you do a small sketch and you get, let's say, 10,000 likes or you get 50 likes or whatever your poison is, you instantly have gratification for something that you really didn't do much work at all. So
Yeah.
people tend to get a little bit lazier with that. Do you feel that now that we have cell phones and all this technology, that it's kind of pushed the artist in a different way? Because of course the community has grown bigger, where there's people you can talk to like you and myself. I would never in a million years get to meet you or have known anything about you if it wasn't for social media or if it weren't for technology. But at the same time, I feel that you would have had to, or I would have had to work harder to try to meet you at a show and physically be a better artist than just saying, "Hey, I have a podcast." Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
true. Yeah.
so wait, where was the question again?
Sorry, man. The question in
Yeah.
general is like, do you feel that like with technology, like you were saying, versus when you went to school till now, do you feel that it's hindered some artists,
For
helped?
sure, it's hindered and helped. You know, it's that kind of balance that's just happening. It's been great in a lot of ways for me, but I also come from a time when I had to work harder. I
Hmm.
had to like, I talk to my students about this a lot because they have to take photo reference for my class projects sometimes, and they all got a camera in their pocket, but somehow that's difficult to do because they're just not used to it. But when I was in school, we didn't have that, and we still had to do it. So we'd go buy those disposable cameras from the store, try and like cover your finger over the flash and light some things, and then go get them developed and hope that you got something that you could use for class. But so yeah, I mean, I think there's so much at people's fingertips, but they don't know like how to. It's almost too easy. So
Utilize.
like instead of doing anything, you just like know that you could if you had to, and that's good enough or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, oh well, I know how to do that because all I got to do is Google it, and then I'll know.
So, as a teacher, are there things that you see, not in specific towards anybody or any students, but are there things that you see that peeve you while you're trying to share what you know versus like the things that peeve you now with all this technology and with the way that the mindset is of the new age artist versus when you were coming up?
For sure. I mean, it's the phones. If the phones would disappear, that'd be great. But as a teacher, um, like I don't. Well, it's definitely like during demos, people can be on their phones just not paying attention, which is crazy to me because I'm not showing you how to paint for myself because I already know what I'm doing. And or when the models are posing, people are on phones, that kind of thing. Where just people cannot get off of it; they can't help themselves. Um, but yeah, I mean that definitely bugs me, and I have to like tell people but it is just a generational thing. And so also like a lot of my sketches I would have due for my class, say painting class, I'd have like drawing comps due for something. And then they all want to do digital for like the last 5 to 7 years. It's like people, they always ask if they can do it digitally. And I've always said no. Unless you do like, the people who draw have to do 3 comps and then you have to do a million of them, because if you're going to do it digital, then I should punish you. But that's one thing I'm starting to embrace too. Like this semester is the first time ever I let them do some digital steps, not for the final, but to get to the final, because I know like they're just all a little more comfortable and a little more competent that way. So I want the best piece. So I'm trying to embrace it a little bit. I did get an iPad for drawing. I don't know. I mean, if you can use it, I think it's great.
I don't think it's a bad thing though, because there's the whole thing. We've talked about this in past podcasts about how the tattoo industry has a lot of old school people who genuinely are like, well, if you're on your fancy iPad, you're not a real tattoo artist. It's like, well, that's true, but you also, I mean, as far as aesthetically as we know tattooing today, it's only 100 years old. Art's been around 2,000 years. Like, there's always somebody that's always going to be is always claiming the old school way or trying to pioneer the new school. And I think having digital, especially like iPads are a prime example for the traveling artists such as yourself. If you're traveling a lot, it's nice to be able to work on something that you love or just kill time without having to bust out 50 different things.
Right.
But if you're relying specifically on digital and you never know, like the best way I've ever heard it was one of my buddies went to a Pixar sketching class or something that they were doing for hiring, and he had said that one of the people that were hiring had 8 artists in a room and had told them, okay, well, we're all going to do a digital painting, then we're going to do a physical one, then we're going to do a digital sketch, then we're going to do a physical sketch. Everybody that finished at the end of the thing, there were 5 of them when they turned it in, and they had completed the digital sketches and the paintings no problem. Their physicals not so much. There were 2 that were all physical, no digital, and then there was 1 that was versatile. The ones that got the job were the 3 physical ones, not the digital, because the guy says, we can teach you how to use a computer, but if you can't physically know what it's like to have to work with a real pencil, real pen, real brush, and value what art supplies cost, value what to do with physical media, then you're never going to truly value the work that we put into this. Yeah. So it would take us longer to teach you how to use a charcoal pencil versus us having to teach you to use a Wacom tablet.
For sure. But eventually it's going to go away, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be that nostalgia for physical media. I mean, look at vinyl. Vinyl has come back in a big way because people want this physical thing to collect. I feel that physical media will now become something that it's going to get popular because it's so rare in the next 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. That's all I got to offer.
Grab your Sean Cheetham original painting for 4.6 mil.
Yeah.
So when you're teaching, what are some of the basic fundamentals that you focus on with students, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, it really depends because I teach some full-time at Art Center, so I teach a lot of different classes. But when I do workshops and stuff, those are all pretty much similar portrait-based classes. So one of the big things for me is just drawing. It's the most basic issue that everybody seems to have is drawing. And there's often this like, well, I can't draw very well, so I'm going to paint, which is crazy to me. It's like saying you want to be an Olympic runner, but you haven't quite figured out that walking thing yet. Probably not your thing. But so that's it. And then just value. I mean, it sort of changes too over the years with teaching so much and having the same, like I have, a little bit of a system. It like gets old. So my priorities change with what I'm sort of stressing. Mm-hmm. And it's always just based on what I find important for myself. But drawing, getting your stuff dark enough.
With drawing, what do you think is the biggest problem students have? I've had a few for a watercolor class that I do, and I feel that it's always the idea of proportion. You know,
Hmm.
I always try to tell students when they say you have to practice at getting better at drawing, you're not really learning at drawing hands better. You're learning at drawing hands more proportional. Or you're learning
Yeah.
at drawing faces more proportional. And people, like you said, whether it be value or sketching in general, they have this need to just fill up the entire page. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like they don't learn how to square things out or do a nice composition.
Hmm.
What do you feel that you see the most out of your students that have problems with drawing? Like, what is a common trait that you see amongst a lot of students?
It is proportions the main thing, just putting things in the right place. I think that goes a little bit hand in hand with the distraction of, modern society and not being able to like sit and look hard enough or take enough time to measure.
Mm-hmm.
Everything could be measured. If you could just like teach a monkey how to like measure something, then like a monkey could draw. And I'm sure there's drawing monkeys on the internet somewhere.
There's one named Coco.
See, Coco has patience. Coco's probably over 25 years old. But that's it. I mean, you can sit and measure. I had a teacher do that in college who made us like, everyone's, drawing over the semester. This is first term too. And he just had us draw. We all sat facing each other's profile and had each of us draw an ear, ballpoint pen, so there's no sketching, and draw their ear, height and width, and carefully look. And then off of that, every little thing was measured, every angle, every sort of, proportional decision. And everybody's drawings had the best likeness up until that day ever created, at least in that class, because he just kind of walked us through this patient process of measuring one thing off of the other. And it's true, everything will end up in the right place if you just take your time and before you put down a bunch of dark marks, like make sure it's correct.
With value, like we have one of the photos up here right now of it shows all there's 9 photos and it's just showing the complete process of when you paint. It looks like a African American gentleman in a tuxedo, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Because you have something that I see in quite a few painters where you guys really work off of like your mid tones, then you go dark, then you go light, and you kind of almost like repeat process as
Mm-hmm.
you're building. When people go into doing more depth, they usually just want to load black in, like automatically just go straight for the black and like I got it.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you try to keep in mind when you're building your depth and your tones?
Well, honestly, I wish people would go more black.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like I'm having the opposite problem. People aren't going dark enough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me, like that one you're talking about, actually, that was more of a mid-tone dark and a mid-tone light, and then just sort of pushed them darker and pushed them lighter. But generally, I go more of a dark to light, so I get the black in fat, like in the beginning, so that I know that's it. Because that to me is like the absolute thing. I can't. The lightest light isn't pure white, but the darkest dark is as dark as my palette can take me.
Right.
So if I go with that, then I can just work my way up. What's the next darkest? What's the next darkest after that? And kind of that's the way I prefer to apply paint,
Mm-hmm.
rather than like with that one you're showing of the mid tones. I enjoy that. That's fun, but that's not how I would do something.
I have this one up here as well. This is your self portrait, and it has you in like a black hoodie.
Mm-hmm. With the stitches and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So like to really bring in like how much you put in your dark versus light tones. Do you stick to one specific palette, or do you just kind of change it as it goes? Because there's people that stick to like a Zorn palette.
Yeah,
And
no, I stick to the basic same palette that it's sort of a hybrid of what I learned from Husser at Art Center, and then I've tried so many other palettes and sort of like always went back to just organizing the palette, which is what I learned.
do you mind
From him.
do you mind me asking what is Hustler's palette?
I don't know now. It's been so long since I've like
Because
worked with
he has
him.
he has a very warm palette, almost like a
Yeah,
cream
I mean the
palette.
bulk of it's still pretty much similar. I mean, I feel like at some point when I started teaching he had read an article that I had done. Somebody interviewed me about at my workshop, and so they talked about the palette, and he's just like, I don't even understand what this is, what you're saying, but okay. Um, anyway, so
But for
I
your
don't know. I
palette,
mean, lots of there's like there's just a lot of there's tons of colors on there. Not tons, but there's some. I personally like a burnt sienna, or like I think there's another name for it in other brands, like a transparent orange oxide or red oxide or one of those.
hmm
I use that a lot, and um, there was a like a cad green, which I think he eliminated. But I like use a bright red, basically a warm and cool of like each thing, and then a few muddy colors, and then a mixed black, which he used to do the olive and alizarin. So I liked that, but I felt like it was too warm, like you're
hmm
saying. So I added ultramarine blue because I was trying ultramarine and burnt umber, which is a traditional black combination, but I didn't like burnt umber. So, and sometimes I'll add black to go deeper. Sometimes I'll add raw umber to like for shortcuts.
yeah, because a lot of your paintings, like there's a one with a gentleman with like a newsboy hat on. He's a little heavier set with the beard.
Hmm.
The background has that dark grayish color. It has a really nice big like a cast lighting next to him, and he has like a buttoned up blue shirt.
Hmm.
When you're choosing to do your backgrounds, when you're choosing to do all the things, like when you have your darks, they're very prominent, they're very
Hmm.
clean, they're very well placed, but everything else seems to have a mute tone. Is there a reason why you choose to do a lot of mute dark tones?
That's just how I see things, I
Mm.
guess. I feel like I've been getting more and more colorful over the years, but mostly with the light colors. And I feel like shadows, don't have a ton of color. Not in my work, and I don't put a lot of importance in the shadows, so I just let them take the back seat because I like that contrast. I
Do you
like
do you,
dark
do you
paintings.
do you try to keep your shadows pretty simple? Because I know there's some people who like to layer and layer and layer different hues to try to
Hmm.
get like the idea of light going
Hmm.
through those areas. But other painters just like to just slap on whatever colors they feel.
Yeah, I pretty much paint everything. I try and finish everything in the
La Prima style.
one pass alla prima. Yeah, because that's just how I was trained, and I never understood really like painting it a few times just to change it again. I didn't learn that way, so I don't totally understand it, and I got other things to do, so might as well get it done and then move on to sanding a knife for 15 hours.
How long does it actually take you to finish an average painting? Let's just say what is the size that you actually prefer to work in?
It really varies because I enjoy really small miniature things. Not that I do a lot of those, but I enjoy big paintings too. So
Mhm.
it just depends on time, with what I'm interested in at the time, or space, or what the goal of the piece is, or who it's for. Um, so, I mean, let's just say that portrait of me with the black eye, the actual oil painting part, maybe like it would be in a class, like 5 6 hours. I did do that for a class,
Mhm.
as a demonstration, and it was mostly wet into wet. As far I think maybe I did actually darken the shadows later, but that was it. So maybe a total, because of the underdrawing on that one, a total of 10 hours tops, maybe.
Nice. What what are some of the biggest influences you on as an artist when you were younger versus today? Like other artists, other things. I mean, you like Star Wars as a kid. Is there other stuff
Yeah,
that
I
really
was really
pushes
into
you?
that, and I would buy all the Art of Star Wars books, and I thought I'd be into doing like storyboards or something like that. Love Drew Struzan, in the movie posters, of course, like without a doubt. Like I like that style and technique, and grew up with that stuff.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, as a kid, I mean, I think more illustrative things. I'm trying to think of what else. Like I did have to go to not have to, but I did get to go to museums as a kid. I remember like my parents still have like a Rembrandt master copy I did from the museum in San Francisco when
Mhm.
I was like 10 years old. And as I recall, I remember enjoying doing that. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Nowadays, it's all the same guys. For painting, I enjoyed. the Sargents and Rembrandts and all the ones everybody likes. But honestly, nowadays I look at a lot of knives. There's like this other whole art side to things. The craft. Maybe it's because I feel like there's so much craft being lost that I'm really drawn to the craft of metalwork and woodworking.
So where did your love for the fabrication of your artistic side start?
Well, I think I've always liked making stuff. When I was a kid, I'd tinker here and there, but we weren't like a very like my dad didn't have a bunch of tools around the house. He wasn't one of those guys, even though he was a jeweler. So all his kind of stuff was at his office, which I wish I would have like kind of been a little more involved with that as a kid. We tried it out a little, but it just didn't seem like a thing for me. But if he still had his shop now, I'd be probably picking his brain about all kinds of little decorative things and metals and techniques. So um, now I'm losing track of where I was going with
You're cool,
that.
man. I was just asking you, like, what got you into doing all the knives and the palette knives and the
So
metalwork?
okay, so I had been when I was a kid too. I worked with not as a kid, but maybe like a teenager. I worked with my uncle, who was a contractor, is still a contractor. So we had to build. We'd be up early in the morning building things. So I learned a lot about just making stuff from him. Building staircases, or I remember he was like building a lot of check cashing centers, and just that manual labor. Getting up early, drilling holes in bulletproof steel for 8 hours. I learned a lot from him about just using power tools and making things, and we'd work in his garage sometimes. And I was really into like the Renaissance fair and knights and armor and stuff as a teenager too. I wanted to go to jousting camp.
Oh
This is
yeah.
pre-internet. I found out about this maybe at a Renaissance fair and got a pamphlet and like sent away for it, and it came in the mail. And I never did it, but I did with my uncle. We tried making some big old broadswords in his garage. He didn't know anything about metalwork, but he had grinding equipment. So, and we bought some steel and we just tried it. And he was supportive of that. He had made chainmail as a kid out of like soda can little poppers, and then me and my brother decided to try and make chainmail. So we took wire and built a crank, and cranked it up and cut them, and started making like that kind of stuff too. And I tried armor with my dad's friend, who was a sheet metal worker. Also in my teens, I wanted to make like a Crusader helmet, so I started making one of those, never finished. So the interest goes back super far, but I think now with the internet, everything is within reach, and
Hmm.
like I know it's there, but I still have to learn it. So I ended up like being on vacation in Sweden and visiting a knife maker, and then just seeing like somebody who did it. It was like, well, it's not that out of reach. It seems like you don't need that many tools, and you can. And then so I started researching it, and kind of sparked my interest again, because I had a real interest in Japanese swords there for a while too. Just obsessively studying about them and reading, and I have a nice one that one of my dad's friends who collects them gave me years ago, and so of course I'd love to do that too, but just kind of re-sparked that interest in knives and metal, and looked up a place in LA that did blacksmithing classes super
Hmm.
close, and I just signed up to try it because it was only like $60, and it was so awesome. Had the greatest time, and I was hooked. That was it. It just at that point became super accessible to me, and then just the amount of information that people share online, the generosity of like those guys that have worked hard and figured it out. It's been great because they're all super helpful if you want to just talk to them, or anybody that I've asked about teaching is fully into teaching me. Not that it's free or anything, but they're all down to share information, and so that's where that is, and now it's just totally obsessed. The palette knife thing was, of course, I'm going to make a palette knife.
Hmm.
If I'm going to make other knives, at least try it out.
Do you feel that you are gonna start focusing more on the fabrication of metalworks as you get older and kind of have that replace some of the painting? I mean, outside of what you have to do, because I know that like I do this to break away from the day to day of a tattoo shop and then painting or sketch studies, And
Yeah,
it's nice because the little bit of a break encourages me to do a little bit more of something else that I want to do. Do
for
you,
sure.
do you feel that you're going to go a route that maybe may take more of the knife making serious and kind of have this go away for a bit till you really kind of rekindle it?
Well, that would be cool, I guess. But no, I don't think. I mean, I do honestly have to say that's all I think about with work right now. But I'm planning a solo show for next year, so I'm gonna have to get back to it. I'm forcing myself to like do it, but it's in a situation where I get to have enough control over it where I feel like it's going to be a lot of fun for me.
Mhm.
And then I just want to figure out a way maybe to incorporate some of the metal work into it, maybe into framework or maybe pieces that like are about knives too. Maybe they can be incorporated. I don't know, somehow. For that great scalping painting I have planned, I have to forge my scalping knife.
Some of the some of the paintings that you have done, usually that you display, are of what you do at classes and what you're teaching, the process of alla prima, the process of a portraiture.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get a glimpse into some of the stuff that you're doing personally, and it has a very rustic, old west theme to it.
Mm-hmm.
The burning carriage. There's the one with we used for the podcast advertisement, which was the gentleman with the lighting. That's like the really warm
Yeah, the
lighting.
camp, that was a campfire.
Is there a theme to what you're working on for your show, or is this just something that you've always had like an affinity for? Because there are some people who like to tell stories throughout paintings without really giving them a genuine story, and then there's other people that just like the colors or like
Mm-hmm.
the subject matter.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going full Western for this show because it's just been something I'm interested in right now. And so since I have the opportunity to and the support to do that, I'm going to take advantage of it with that gallery. Maxwell Alexander. They've been dealing with a lot of Western stuff, so it's like an easy like to work with them and supported on both sides. So I've always like when I was a kid, was way into Lone Ranger and would just
Fuck
listen
yeah.
to my record, and I loved cowboy stuff, and I always like every picture, not every, but most of the pictures my mom has, like I'm wearing I have a holster and a hat on or some boots at some point. So, I grew up in San Francisco. It wasn't like cowboy town at all, but I think most kids at some point, boys at least, like, get into American history, and cowboys are this romantic idea. Um, and then going to school for illustration too. Some of my favorite painters were like the American illustrators, and they were sort of at a time where there was still some of the, cowboy stuff going on. So, and maybe just some of those stories were more recent. So there was a lot of great illustrations of that stuff. And, so that sort of, definitely into it. But I really got into it because a couple of my best buds that I play music with and everything had happened to move up to north of LA, like into the mountains. They both, under different circumstances, ended up like as neighbors with lots of space around them. And so I'd get out of town all the time and visit them. And we were like shooting guns, and I have a couple dirt bikes, so I just bring them up there, and we'd be riding trails, and it just felt like the Wild West, like there's like no real rules. It felt like, even though it was totally legal what we were doing, it felt like it wasn't.
You're free.
Free, yes, that freedom isn't free.
No, no, it's not.
Anyway, but so that just kind of added to it too. And then we decided I had to curate a show, and they're both painters too. We went to school together and all that. Although one of them does more commercial art right now, book covers and everything. That's Jeff Nentrup, and then my other buddy John Paul Altamirano. He's a tattoo artist now. So, but they both paint. So I had to curate a show, and they only want 3 people. So I'm like, you know what? Then it's us 3. It's our band. And then we all were into doing some of these Western paintings. We're doing hybrids of like the Western stuff. You may have seen some with like the dirt bike
Yes.
gloves or things like that. So at that point, that was that. And it was fun to do like these modern Westerns. And they were pretty well received. But now I just want to go with more authentic, because I started looking at books and studying about the Old West, and just reading some really gnarly stories and seeing terrible pictures. And I want to depict more of that side, just because to me it's a little more interesting, I think, for subject matter and visually speaking too.
You did a painting of a well, you're saying that you're doing a painting about scalping,
Uh,
and I recently had talked to Blake Newbert on on a previous podcast about just the idea of how people kind of reflect on the past through rose colored glasses and how
Hmm.
he personally likes to paint. And do you know who Blake is?
Yeah, yeah, I know
Yeah.
Blake. He's
And a lot of his stuff, becomes very macabre because that's how he personally sees something. Do you feel that when you do stuff, like if you were to depict a little bit more of the past, the way that you're reading it, the way you see it, do you feel that that is an important thing as an artist to kind of expand the horizons of what history is? Like, for example, I'll give you a good place to get some reference. Uh, do you take the 101 when you head back to LA or up north or anything?
I don't usually. I do. I'm like a five driver, but yeah,
Okay.
101 is good.
If you ever take 101, King City, California is a small little town, but they have a little place called San Lorenzo Park, and in there they have a barn that still has all the stuff from the 1800s, and
Sweet.
it's a free museum, and
Okay.
it's my hometown, but it was cool because you would go there and they still have the original train station where they used to take all the animals to feed, and but there's a lot of gnarly history about Monterey County, and they
Mm.
don't skimp on the details. A lot of people don't like that because they feel like, oh no, it's going to traumatize some kids. But I mean, the way it seems like you're talking about it, you have a chance to kind of really show how you perceive or how you are learning about things you're interested in. Do you think it's important to add those historical accuracies to certain works because it authenticates them, or do you feel like it's just a matter of preference for some people?
For me, I would say both. Definitely preference because I think it's more interesting than I'm more interested in like the kind of gritty side of it. I'm
Of
not like
course.
into the nothing wrong with a beautiful sunset and a cowboy going over the whatever,
The
but that's just
range.
not what I'm interested in. And there's plenty of that. There's so much of that. So yeah, I just want to be a little more authentic because I haven't really read too many romantic stories. Usually they're pretty gross, and so I think it's just more interesting, more romantic, more not less romantic, more authentic, and for me, exciting. More exciting for the visual, I imagine.
Yeah, I do agree though, because when you read, especially a lot about, there's a town called Soledad, California, which a lot of people know because of John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath,
Mm-hmm.
and that's two towns up from where I'm from, King City, or I grew up. And here in Monterey County and everything, everything's John Steinbeck. I mean, I guarantee you, there's a dildo with that dude's face on it. I mean, everyone obsesses over him. But if you really read where some of these places are in these books, it sounds beautiful and gorgeous and all these amazing things. But if you grow up around here and you know the real stories, like where this farm that Lenny and George were at, it was a terrible place. It was a very terrible, dark place. And
Mm-hmm.
having those images, having those true history encounters, and being able to push that through work, I think is extremely important because, like you said, it is a preference thing, but it's more interesting to stare at a car crash than it is at moving traffic. Hence the term pencil neck.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And I feel that when artists do depict that, especially in your style, color and execution, it makes it even more interesting to want to look at it because
yeah,
it brings it to life.
yeah, for sure. Is real. I don't know if I'm gonna how well it's gonna be received, but like that part, I don't care as much about. I care a little bit,
Of
but
course.
because there and also like the Western scene, like I know a lot of guys that do it and are doing well, and so that's as an avenue for like figurative work because I'm interested in it and because it's still pretty booming still. Seems like a the right time for me to maybe try it out, but because I'll be doing it either way. But if I have an avenue to show it and maybe some eyes to look at it, then even better. Either way, I'm going to do it.
What are some of the things that you were really looking forward to do as far as artistically besides this show? Is there anything like classes or something that you're have coming up?
I've got a bunch of workshops happening next year. Always the highlight is going to Rome every year for the big workshop we do. So that's being planned right now. I'm going to Spain to teach next year, which should be fun.
Nice. Are you doing that master's class? Oh no, wait, that's so Florence. Do you do one in Florence? I forget if
I have
it's.
not done one in Florence, only Rome. I've been hit up about Florence, but it's usually like around the time I'd be in Rome, and I feel like doing two and not that far apart would just
Oh,
make two
it
two workshops that don't
it
fill.
it is the Rome one, where it's painting and there's a sculpting and then there's a drawing one, right?
Right? Yeah, Rome
Okay,
Art Workshops is that one.
there you go. That's where I remember when I first had looked you up. How did you get involved in that, and what is the big benefit for anyone out there about going to something like that versus something stateside?
Well, I got involved with it because David Simon and Brian Craig are two sculptor friends who decided to just. They've known each other for a long time. They both had a real love for Italy. David speaks fluent Italian, and so I think they had met up in Italy and decided maybe they should try and just do a workshop there some year. So they threw a sculpture workshop together, just the two of them, using their own resources, and it was successful. So then the next year they wanted to expand and try doing the sculpture and add painting and add drawing, and so they asked me if I'd do the painting, and we sold out. It was great, successful. Next year, let's do it again. Let's add another class. Let's add some other people, and did it again. And then now we're going to be going on my fifth year with them, and I think their sixth year. And now it's expanding. Like before, first year I did it was just a 2 week session. Second year I did 2 2 week sessions. Now they're doing 3 2 week sessions with other artists too coming in later. So
Mhm.
I think it's really great, and everybody that I've had as students in it has really enjoyed it. And a lot of people, it's sort of, they say it's like a life changing thing, and it has been for me too. Just the experience of going to a place like that with that rich history, and you're seeing Bernini and Caravaggio and everybody every day in your face in the street. This amazing quality of art that like seems so out of reach, and it's just there in the streets. And the food's amazing. People are nice. Like the whole experience is great. They do throw a great program. So yeah, I mean, I think it's better than going stateside in a lot of ways, because it's just like you're immersed for 2 weeks also, which is crazy. You get the weekend off, but doing it for 10 days, like you're pretty much eating and sleeping and drinking the art, and then we're going on art history tours and doing trips also.
So one day, so it's 2 weeks. So is it like one day is split specifically for painting, one day for sculpting, or do you guys break it up like
We're pretty
periods?
much in the studio every day, and then some days are just long days in the studio, and some days are like a decent full day in the studio, and then like a tour after. Or we'll do like a big museum trip in the morning, and then get to the studio in the afternoon. Studio every day though, and then the tours. There's such great stuff to see, and Brian and David are really like knowledgeable about the history of everything over there. So it's awesome. It's a great experience, and I know it's not cheap for people, but I do think it's like well worth
The
what it is.
experience, yeah, and the knowledge.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's significantly cheaper than like an art school. Not even close. I had a student who was like going to Academy of Art when I taught a class in Northern California, and she said she was trying to do an overseas program through the Academy, and it was like for her to go for the summer, a summer thing through Academy was like $10,000 to $15,000, and ours was like three, so she took ours.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I also think it's a lot better to genuinely go where you're in a smaller class setting where people can be more personable. Like if you have a class of 50 people, yes, you're going to learn something. Yes, you're going to meet a lot more people, but I feel that you just get grouped together like cattle versus
yeah,
if you have a class of, let's say, 8 to 12, you genuinely have a one-on-one with each person. You get a little bit more personal with the group you're with the instructors, and the fact that you are overseas, and the fact that you eat, drink, and sleep art for these 2 weeks, you walk away more feeling satisfied than just like, well, fuck, I fell behind the class. Versus,
yeah, yeah, definitely. And then I just think in general the difference between workshops and full semester classes, like doing that everyday thing, days in a row really like drives it into your brain a little better. Like I think a 5-day workshop versus a 10-week class where you meet at night once a week, people gain more in half the amount of time, but compressed, than they do like having a week every time to forget something, forget everything, and try to start over all the time. And then with the 2 weeks, it's really like you're coming out of there with something for sure.
What is your favorite thing about teaching abroad, whether it be a museum or whether it be a specific part of Rome? Because when I get to go to Rome with some of my tattoo buddies, it's really funny when you see a lot of guys that go and they take photo references and it's like, I can tattoo that. But they don't
Mm-hmm.
look at it as I can learn from it. It's more of I can do that. Just
Mm-hmm.
find a way to do it versus taking in what it is and that you're looking at a statue or a painting that somebody was really in front of 100,
Mm-hmm.
100 years ago, 700 years ago, so forth. What do you really enjoy taking away from it?
The food. Honestly, I swear to God, my favorite part is the food.
They have steak. Do they have steak Florentines over there? Because I know that's all out through the country.
Yeah, mostly Florence, though. They don't. I don't see them in Rome. There's these other steaks, tagliatelle, where they slice it and put it with arugula, and I love that. And the seafood. I mean, the food's amazing. It's like I had heard that, and I can say that all I want, but it's like until you experience it, I
It's
can't even
different.
really talk about it. It is good, simple.
There is a question here from Ryan Magno.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "Hey,
All
Sean."
right.
He says, "Hey, Sean, how can I start? How can I get started in joining shows? Can you recommend any galleries that I can contact in the Los Angeles area? Thanks, man. I'd appreciate your advice."
That's such a tough question because
Depends on the art.
it depends on the art, and I have been kind of out of touch with a lot of gallery stuff recently.
Hmm.
Um, but since it's Ryan, I can at least answer the question. um, I do think there's a few, like for me personally, I can just go off of my own experience. I showed at Waco or La Luz de Jesus. They do every year like the big shows where they let everybody, not everybody, but they do let people come in, and it's nice that there's a place for people who've never shown to like possibly show. So I did show there as a in the beginning, and I made my first sale, made my first few sales there, and so that was great. But other than that, like I don't know a ton of galleries that like are open to first time people showing, and I don't even know how that process works anymore. I mean, if you just like a gallery, look up if they have a process for contacting. A little bit of like just reaching out and promoting yourself is there's nothing wrong with that too. It's part of the hustle. You kind of have to do it. Um, and I do think in the beginning, just getting into any show you can, any group show that happens. I had done shows with friends where we threw them and like totally unsuccessful in sales, but like fun to do, fun experiences. But yeah, right now it's just a weird time for galleries in general because it's sort of like a lot of galleries are phasing out.
Yeah. I think the only gallery that I've seen that has stayed somewhat consistently well is Gallery 1988 off of
Mhm.
I think it's Melrose it's on or
Yeah,
La
they're on
Cienega.
Melrose.
Yeah, and but I also believe that the biggest problem a lot of artists have now that they don't, whether it be painting and art or even tattooing, they show up to a place and are like, here's my Instagram. They show them their phone. And it's
Hmm.
like, no, back in the day, you used to have a portfolio. You
Yeah.
know, take real photographs of your work or take in some hand sketches and drawings and, like you had said, contact somebody formally and have,
Hmm.
try to be like, hey, this is what I have. Would there be any shows that you'd be interested in? Versus the mentality I've seen with some people that get pretty pissy when no one talks to them because they're like, well, I'm an artist though. And it's like, well, so are 50,000 other
Yeah.
fucking people. So good
Yeah.
luck.
Yeah. I think mean, the only time I ever actually approached a gallery, I did send pictures and a letter, a printed, like a handwritten, not a handwritten, a printed, like a typed out letter and everything. But that's, you know, 15, 16, 17 years ago. I don't know. Times were different. that was the option.
I have a question here from David Chaffetz again.
Okay.
And he asks, Sean, is there any kind of routine that you have to get started in the morning or for painting in general to get your day going?
Um, I need my coffee in the morning. That's it. To start any day, I need to have I like a couple hours of sitting around drinking coffee before anything. As far as like getting in the zone for painting, not so much. But I don't really do that in the morning. I'm much more of a like evening painter.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm working on a show, maybe things will get done in the day. But I like it when the sun's down and people are quiet, and prefer that for painting. But no crazy like rituals where I like have to
Light a baby on fire or something.
yeah something and then do some push-ups and growl. And then time to paint. No.
What have you thought about putting out a book yet if you haven't already?
Yeah, so I've been hit up by a couple publishers. One of them I really liked their work that they had done, and he'd come over and we talked about it. It's just really hard for me to like gather pictures from my whole career. It's all on different computers. Somewhere like half of my career was like art was shot on 4x5 transparencies, and now I got to figure out how to make those look good. So just the organize. I'm terrible at like putting stuff together. And then I had another guy hit me up, the one who published Jeremy Mann's book, asked if I wanted to do one, and yeah, I do. But like getting me off my ass to do it's going to be the hard thing. I'd love to have a book, but it's just like now it's a lot of work for me right now, and I've got other projects that I'm working on, so like it's sort of taken not at all any sort of priority. Theoretically, I would love to have a book. Yeah.
Do you get your your work professionally photographed? Because I know people like Matt Hurtado is really big about the photographer in general that does this stuff out, I believe, in Long Beach. But there are people that thrive off not thrive, but they make it a point. People feel like, all right, I've painted this. Now what? Everybody has their framer. Everybody has their photographer, whatever, whatnot. Do you go to anybody, or do you just kind of wing it and let it do its own thing?
I've done both. Like that painting of me that we were talking about earlier with the black eye, I like scanned it. It's scanned really well too. Like some small paintings like that somehow scan better than like that was the best reproduction. I had gotten that one professionally shot too, and it did not look good. It was an unusable shot, I think, that I got from people. So the only problem I had with that, no, maybe that one was fine. Like I just think it picked up the textures fine, the brush strokes, the colors, it was perfect. So I'll go get stuff shot sometimes. I go to this place, Artworks, in Highland Park that I've been going to since I was in school. But a lot of times, like their stuff looks great for when they're doing prints, but like when I bring it to my computer, it's just the calibration's not working for me, and I'm not really great at like getting it to work. So I just end up shooting it myself. And I think for print, for most print nowadays, but anything else we're using is mostly web. So, I can get a pretty high resolution picture. I've got some cameras that are fine, and just proper lighting. I like having control over it.
Well, I think that's a big thing too. Is I love collecting books. I love collecting a lot of art of books, and I got a preview from Zero Publishing of the Crayola book, and it's amazing the work that goes into it. But you can tell that there's a hands-on feel to Greg Simpkins' work. Some people, when they put other people in charge, I feel that you can tell when somebody really loves what they do, and when somebody's just kind of like, well, it is what it is. They just want content to be out there so they can build their resume. I would have to say it would be very interesting to see a book from you put together, but I would have to agree that, yeah, you seem like you have a very personable approach to everything you do artistically. So if you put it in anyone else's hands, it would be I don't think up to par.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind like some of it put into other people's hands because there's a lot of things like I don't think about when it comes to like designing a book. But yeah, just getting it started, it requires my me to start. And I don't think I don't have one file that has all my work in it in high resolution, organized, titled, all that. I'm like on 3 or 4 different computers around different hard drives left over the years and stuff. So it would just take some organization.
Any books that you personally could like in your library or recommend to students or people that just want to know?
Um, I love books. I have tons of books, and I don't have like any real favorites right now. There's the old Phil Hale Goad book. Like I carried that in my backpack, like overseas and all over for a long time. And it's like the spine's taped up, and there's an original drawing of his in it. But that for me is probably the only one that I ever like carried. But yeah, no. As far as the rest now, no.
You currently have a brush set out through Trickle or Trickle, depending on what
Yes.
they're calling themselves now. But Courtney and you put together a set, and it was really good. I actually got one of your prototype brushes when they were trying to fine tune it, and I actually have it right over there at my little desk. And she gave it because she's like, "Oh, you like Sean? Go for it." And I was like, "Oh, sweet." It's like a little liner brush. But how does it feel having a brush series? And do you feel that having like a set for someone that says like for saying someone that goes to your class is a great way to try to understand how you paint, or is it just another tool? Because some people do tend to say like, oh, I want the Sean Cheetham set, or I want the Greg Simpkins set. So now that I have that, I can paint the entire world versus
Yeah.
just being like, well, these are parameters of what they're giving me. And so I have to try to work with these parameters and find what I like out of it.
No, those brushes are exactly what I like and want to use. I There should be a disclaimer that they definitely aren't going to make you better. Guaranteed not to make you better, but also not to make you worse. Yeah, no, I used to use Winsor Newton brushes, like the University series red handles, these nylons, and I'm fine with like those types of nylon brushes. I like them a lot. They cooperate with the way I move my hand and the way I mix paint and the amount of paint I use and all that stuff. So when I started to be in touch with Courtney and Trickell, like she gave me the brushes that were kind of the equivalent of what I was using, and I felt like they were the most cooperative version of that shape and size and style brush, so I really liked them. And then they had black handles instead of red handles, which was cool too. And then their bristles, I use bristle brushes from them too. They're not in my set, but like I love the way they work. They hold up really well, they wear in really well, and I like that they're made locally. All around good.
Do you prefer a specific type? Because I know some people live and die by hog bristle, or like their version, the Legion, which is like a hybrid bristle brush. Other people like to use, like even for oil, they like to use synthetics. Is there any real preference of what you like truly like to use and why?
I just like those synthetics. They function well. I'm not a big fan. I don't care about natural hair. I don't care about sables. They don't. I'm really good at destroying brushes, and these hold up well. So,
As far as everything else that you have, I have 3 or 4 more questions. Let's see.
is it possible to take a quick restroom break?
Yeah, go for it, dude. I'll talk while you go. Go.
All right, I'll be right back.
Go ahead.
Thanks.
So to anyone that is listening on the live part, I would say if you have questions right now for Sean, go ahead and ask. He's a bit nervous, so you can kind of tell, but he's a great guy. And personally, if I can talk about Sean, even if he is not here at the moment, I really do love his work, and it really does inspire me because not only do the colors and the subject matter of what he does is amazing, but it's the idea of creating something really vivid from something simple. I mean, when you look at it, it seems simple, but there's so much to that. And I believe that it genuinely makes you a better artist to learn to dumb things down. I know that sounds really rude, but I don't mean it that way. There's a book called The Art of Pixar and then The Color of Pixar. These 2 books have a lot of stuff from Amy Wong, Jerry Schill and all these other artists, where you see different sketches and storyboards from Pixar films. There's no words in it; they're just straight photos of these stills. But you really look at them, and the message that they tell you in the beginning is something that's very simple can create something so intense. So having that is really important by understanding how people work and how people just learn to captivate without putting too much. So, like I said, if you can, if you've never heard of him, check out his work. Go to a gallery, go to a show. Because if you're not, you're genuinely missing out. Like there's no doubt about that. Okay, you are back.
Are you talking about someone else right now?
Yeah. I was talking about some guy. So you don't know him, but
Okay, that's cool. I missed it.
I have a question here from Eric Villeres. And Eric Villeres asks, when you're painting, do you genuinely try to go thicker or thinner with your paint? Alla Prima seems to be very hard only because I can't seem to layer the paint without it scraping off the other paint. I've heard fat over thin, but I genuinely don't understand it and don't really have any other outlets like schools to ask people what to do, and YouTube can be extremely frustrating. Any advice?
The fat over lean definitely, well, in my opinion, and what I think, yes, you can layer thicker paint over thin paint easier than thin paint over thicker paint, but that has more to do with less to do with alla prima and more to do with just indirect painting, where you don't want thick paint to dry or start to dry and then paint like a thin glaze over the top, because that underpainting hasn't actually oxidized completely. So then the top paint that you put on that's thinner will start to dry faster because it's thinner, and then the stuff underneath gets trapped, not drying, and then as it's trying to oxidize, it'll create cracking and movement underneath the surface. So the fat overlean definitely to me is more of just thinking about layering a painting as it's drying in between. So thin underpainting, thicker paint on top, you should have no problem. As far as doing alla prima, it just takes practice. Luckily I got to do tons of it when I was in school, and I still have to do it 3 to 4 times a week for my job. So I'm still practicing constantly, and that's all it is practice. Taking a workshop with somebody would be a great place to do something, instead of just trying to learn on the internet. Doing it with somebody is important. And there's so many artists and teachers around the country, even that, I don't know where I don't even know which country he's in, but I think workshops are great. Not super expensive for what you get. Much cheaper than art school.
Sarah Tamar asks, when painting, what do you feel was hard for you when you first started versus what do you feel is hard for you now? When I started painting, it takes me forever to measure and get the exact proportions that I want in my artwork. But as I've gotten better, I feel that I'm more confident at my color palette than I am at my measurement skills.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then that's probably what you should practice is your measuring skills. I mean, I think first thing is practice drawing, don't paint until you can draw well, and then draw with line and get proportions, and then draw with tone and get your values, and then paint with tone and get your values in paint without thinking about color. And then, once you have competence with the drawing, the application of oil paint, and the values, then you can think about color. But since you have the color down, I guess you can just put that aside for a while. But one thing at a time, I think it's good to focus on. And just know your weaknesses and work on those.
Eric Quintanar asks, what kind of paints do you prefer using? Is there a specific brand? Is there a difference between viscosities of paint? Also, when traveling overseas, do you usually have a hard time getting through customs? I am from Brazil, so I have a hard time trying to get to U.S. to different places and seminars because they do not allow us to travel with paint.
That's weird. Wait, there's a few questions. So brands, I'm not a big. I don't I'm not like a snob about brands. I don't use only the fanciest of this and that. I do care about not using cheap products too, but uh, my training was with a lot of Winsor Newton specific pigments, so I do use some of theirs, but I've been slowly trying to phase them out because I'm not totally sure about the quality based on just using them and how things go. So Trikel works with Gamblin now, and I've used a lot of their stuff. I like it, so that's been handy. I use them for certain specific colors. Sometimes I have Old Holland. I like the nicer companies like Old Holland and whatever else. All those expensive ones. Michael Harding makes really nice paint. And yeah, they do vary. The nicer paints tend to seem a little more dense in the tube because they're not like filling it up with whatever they're filling it up with. There's a Winsor Newton tube of burnt sienna. I love it. The big ones. I like the color, but the tube feels like it's whipped cream. It's a little suspicious to me. So I'm trying other substitutes for it. I'm not trying to buy whipped cream. I don't know. Was there another question in there? Oh, and traveling with paints. I don't like. I put all my paints in a bag or in a box. I used to do a bag with a printout that I got off of Scott Burdick's website about traveling with paints and the TSA contact for hazardous materials, and I highlighted everything, and it says the flash point. You don't mention the word paint. You can say artist colors with vegetable oil, but if you search it online, there's all kinds of people that have the same problem, and they'll have little printouts of like the data sheet from the company that tells you that paint is not flammable at this temperature and this and that, and then I just throw that in there and I pack it in my check-in, not carry-on, and it's been fine. Nice. One person couldn't get on a flight. They got to Europe and they couldn't get on the Ryanair had their own policies about traveling with paint. But I've only once had my box opened and they just closed it back up. And unfortunately, didn't know how to close a box without smashing tubes between the dividers. But they didn't take anything.
Jason Nolan asks, panel, linen, or canvas? Preferences, pros, cons.
That's the order I like them: panel, linen, canvas, and linen over panel. I like panels. I like rigid surface. I like panels also because I like smooth, not slippery, but I like flat. I like it to start on a surface where I know that every bit of texture is going to be determined by my hand and not predetermined by the surface. For studies, I'll use linen and canvas because they're just quick studies in class, and I'll take what I can get. And they grab the paint well. So I most often do not paint on a stretched canvas. So it'll be a canvas board, a linen over panel, or just a straight panel. For gallery work, always panel. For commissions, always panel, unless there's a specific request for something like linen.
I've seen in some of the videos of your demos that you always shape your board. Shape your brushes to paint. You had once said that sometimes you'll move the paint a certain way with the brush, so when you make the shape with the bristles, so it can make the mark the way it needs to be. Is there anything that you kind of have like as a must checklist when you're painting, whether it be starting off or something that you do whenever you reach your palette?
No, it varies on what I'm doing, the specific mark I'm making, or the color or whatever. But it's also just intuitive and subconscious at this point. But I've had to kind of dissect it a little bit because of teaching. I always keep a paper towel in hand because that, for me, I mix with my brushes, so I get a lot of paint sort of built up around the ferrule. So I have the paper towel so that I'm constantly squeezing my brush out so that there's not a lot of weird paint in places that I don't know. But yeah, as far as like every time, there's not one thing I do. I look a lot and I mix while I look. And so when I'm painting, I'm looking at a shape, I'm planning the shape. While I'm mixing it, there's a plan happening in my head. So the way I pull the brush off of the palette is sort of determined by where it's going. Am I going to just do a brush stroke that starts with a point and tapers out? Am I going to do just fill in a big area and I need to scoop up the paint? Am I going to do a little highlight and I need to like squeeze the brush so that it has no paint in it and I just need to pick up a tiny bit of it? You know, it all depends on what I'm doing, and I don't think about it. I just do it.
Now, hard mixing versus pre-mixing. There's a lot of artists that are always saying, "Oh man, I have to pre-mix everything because I don't like to have to remake it, or your colors get too contaminated." You don't seem like somebody that does pre-mixing, and I'm personally somebody that's not a real big fan of it. But what's your take on both?
Well, I learned, you know, lots of ways to do it. I've tried ways where you just don't draw anything and you mix every little color from one detailed point out and you just mix and mix and mix and you redo it. And I can do that. I can match colors okay and get colors that I imagine pretty easily. But the thing that I stuck with the most is that thing I learned is sort of a little bit of pre-mixing, like bigger piles, yes, but not mixing without. Like I've seen videos of people mixing whole skin tones without even the model there, which to me that doesn't work for me. Makes sense, sure, but I think for me, like I pre-mix sections based on what I'm looking at. So like if I'm in front of a model, I'll mix, you know, I'll tone the surface or something based on what I'm seeing, then I'll draw, and then I'll, you know, mix a background, a big pile of it. I won't mix like just to say there's like a gray wall with a shadow on it. I won't mix just the shadow and just the thing. I'll mix a big pile of gray and make part of that shadow and make part of it the wall, make part of it the wall and light, whatever. So there's a little bit of pre-mixing a bigger thing and then mixing out of that. For skin tones, I'll mix the person's specific skin tone in light and in shadow, and then adjust little bits out of it. But I'll mix a big pile sort of first. So there's big piles and pre-mixing along the way, but not like before the whole thing starts. Sort of in between, I guess. It's my middle child's showing. Can't do one or the other.
And last question for you, my friend, is Brooke Farico. Brooke Farico says, "Love your work. Want to let you know that I genuinely am inspired by your painting. Do you have any advice for people that are trying to get better at art but have no access to, what's that word? I think she means seminar. She says seminarios. Seminars, like schoolism. Schoolism seems to be very fun, but it is also hard to take classes when you don't know if it's a really bad question. I'm gonna assume what the question is for her.
Okay.
For somebody that doesn't have a access to going to seminars, maybe because of travel or different parts of the world, you have websites like Schoolism, you have YouTube, so forth. Do you have any advice for people that have a hard time getting around, whether it be a book, whether it be a website, whether it be certain artists to talk to?
I mean, I think those things are great, but like Schoolism, and I don't know who's all on there, but I know for sure like Jason Seiler.
Yeah, Jason's on there.
Yeah, like I know him and he's a buddy, but I don't know anyone else. And then what's the other one? There's one out at New Masters Academy. I'm supposed to try and maybe do some work with them, but it just keeps not lining up. But their videos are great, I think. You know, if that's all you can do, that's all you can do. But I do think workshops are important, or, you know, keep a sketchbook and draw every day, all day, at every little bit you can. If you're, you know, waiting in line, you should be drawing. That's what I feel like the best people when I was in school were the ones that were drawing constantly. I don't do it anymore, but I did go through it. You know, I've put in my 20,000 hours probably.
I'll give you one more just because this guy is like a very loyal listener and good dude. His name is Mackenzie McCoy. He says, any reference materials in regards to improving values, like darks and lighting, etc. Anything to work? Anything you would recommend on working on lights and darks and values in painting?
One thing, I mean, I notice most people just, the tricky thing is, yeah, I mean, that's a tough question because I don't know, you know, like what the problems are. Like, do you go too light? Do you go too dark? It sort of depends on what your problem is.
Maybe
a lot of people.
Maybe if you're starting from like let's just say from like a a flat vantage point and you're saying, okay, this is you're gonna learn value day one. What are some things that would help you learn value? Let's put it that way.
Well, I think if you can break it down to the most essential first, black and white, you know, high contrast. If you can draw from anything, observation out of books, anything, but turn it into just two values first. Imagine like a Banksy stencil, that kind of like, those look realistic because they're just properly drawn because they're traced off of photos. But like if you can get those shapes right in black and white and get an image to read, that's the most basic value thing you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can break down your darks into two values or three values. You can break your lights into two values or three values. But like if you can't just separate dark from light to start, that's where the struggle really begins. And I mean, it's different painting from life or drawing from life versus drawing from photos, because a lot of times working from life, your eyes can adjust to things in a really crazy sensitive way. So like when you're staring at, that's the big problem I have with people. Not a problem, but the biggest issue I see people doing is just like staring at the shadows for so long that they become light. Because like when you walk into a dark room, you can't see. Your eyes have the ability to adjust, but when you stare at somebody who's lit by a light, your eyes are going open and closed depending on how hard you're looking or staring. So people stare, and then they do these really light shadows, and then they get to the lights, and they're light too, and then all of a sudden there's no sort of form or relationships or simple division of light and shadow. And the same goes for the lights. You stare at a highlight for long enough, the color next to it might look really dark, yet it's not. It's just that the highlight's pushing your eye to close to like see more values. So, practicing things properly, but yeah, black and white,
Yeah.
graphic.
Yeah, because I've heard certain artists talk about where they wear glasses when they walk outside because they don't want their pupils to dilate too much or retract depending on certain lighting. Because if you're going to sit for an alla prima, you need to focus on certain things, or if you're going to give yourself a rest in between painting, like you said, focusing on, let's say, the shadows from a hat or something too much, you need to let your eyes adjust thoroughly, which also goes back to the whole proportion thing, is take your time and measure. Measure can be proportion, and measure can be also hue and saturation.
So I don't want people to let their eyes focus at all, is what it is when looking. I want like when I'm looking for how dark a shadow is, I'm going to look at the light and feel it off to the side, so I can feel that relationship. And if I'm going to look at how bright the light is, I'm going to look at the shadows for a little bit and just feel that like separation. Now, I'm not going to look at the thing. I'm going to look at the thing when I need to like be detailed or specific about temperature or something. But like for the relationship of what's dark and what's like how light or how dark things are, I'm moving my eyes constantly. I'm not allowing them to focus is the idea.
You get too settled.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, for anyone that is interested in your work, interested in the workshops or anything about you, brother, go ahead and plug away where they can find you, projects, galleries, whatever.
I am on Instagram and Facebook. No one goes on Facebook anymore, but it's all just under Sean Cheetham. I think my Instagram is just Sean Cheetham also. I'll be showing in November at Maxwell Alexander next year. We don't have a date set yet. And as far as like information about like contact and web stuff or workshops, Sean Cheetham Fine Art is a newer website that I have. SeanCheethamFineArt.com, built by my buddy Vince, who was tired of my old website that wasn't really even a functioning link. So I'll have to update all the class stuff for next year, but that's where to find it.
Cool.
And any sort of contact on social media is fine too.
Any last words for anyone out there?
Get off your phones. Get to work.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you so much for making the
you.
time, dude. I know you're extremely busy. It's been an honor as far as talking to someone that I really look up to, as well as just to share the time with people that are listening. For everyone else out there, as always, thank you for joining us for this week. To find Sean, it was Sean Cheetham Fine Art.com.
Yeah, .com.
.com.
I should know.
To go to his website, see his work, any future galleries coming up. If there's a seminar near you, if there's anything that this man is doing, look out for it and make sure that you support it, because without people like this pushing people like us, we have nothing. So as always, you can find this on. We are now on Stitcher. You can find us for free. As always, people have been emailing me that they've been getting some weird links from other people about random purchases and charges. I will never in a million fucking years charge for this podcast. So if you get that, throw it in the trash. Be sure to look up more on the website at brushesofdoom.com. I will have all the links to Sean's website, his Instagram, and stuff for you guys to check out on your own. Sean, thank you again.
All right. Thank you, X. It was fun.
And we will see you next week.